Like many of you, I am what you would consider a weeb, a derogatory term to describe the fans of truly the worst kind of entertainment sector in modern media, otherwise known as an anime fan. Yes, the once relatively niche fan base that if you dared admit it to being one 10 years ago, would have been met with ridicule, humiliation, and maybe even physical violence, just for liking Japanese cartoons now has become this major juggernaut in the entertainment industry, with its popularity exploding massively in the West, to the point you'll get major musicians dressing as characters from Jujutsu Kaisen for Halloween, or footballers pulling out a kamui from Naruto as a celebration. My point being, the Western view of anime has changed a lot in the past 10 years. It's become a lot more widely accepted, but what hasn't changed are the games that these popular animes are based on. And to be clear, I don't mean games such as Persona, which have a very obvious anime-like art style. I'm talking about full-blown anime games based on series like Attack on Titan, My Hero Academia, Black Clover, and many more. But the one thing that hasn't changed about them is the plain old fact is, they suck. Now that might be coming off a bit harsh, but honestly, I have played a lot of these games and watched a lot of these shows, but let's be honest with each other, the only reason that we play these games is because of the anime that is attached to them. I mean, look at the Naruto fighting games. Storm is one of the best selling fighting game franchises of all time, but anyone who's played these games will be able to tell you that these games are the same copy and pasted 3D arena fighters, just churned out really quick to make some money. They don't care about shaking things up, or even trying to make it remotely competitive, and to do that to a series as big as Naruto. It's just disappointing, but I don't really want to talk about Naruto today. There are some different games I would like to talk about, which are games that I think should be so much better. My beloved Fairy Tail. Now that's a cold ass take if there ever was one. Fairy Tail, for those who don't know, was a massive popular shonen anime that ran from 2009 till 2019. It was very popular in its day, and its sales even rivaled more popular series such as Bleach and Naruto, which is impressive. So it would only make sense for them to make a game based on that success. And so they did in the early 2010s, and we received some games for the PSP that followed the early arcs of the anime, and they had a middling reception and not really fondly remembered by people. But that's not the game I want to talk about. The game I want to talk about is the one that we received in 2020, simply just called Fairy Tail. I was so excited for this. I mean, the world might have been burning down around us, but I mean, we were finally getting another game in my favourite anime series. I genuinely thought it was never going to happen. Video games and anime are my two favourite things in the world. Surely this was going to be fantastic. Now this might sound like a petty complaint, but for me this was a big disappointment. Although this might be a crime to say out loud, but I watched my anime dubbed. I know, put those pitchforks away, but it's simply a preference. And over the years I have become quite attached to these characters and the way that they sound. So not being able to hear them in the game was just a bit disappointing to me, but it wasn't a complete deal breaker. I wasn't completely foreign to the Japanese cast of Fairy Tail, but those aren't unfortunately the characters I fell in love with, which really dampened my enjoyment, but like I said, it's not a complete deal breaker for me, but what was, however. Now don't think for 1 second that this is a dig at turn-based combat in games, because truth be told, I love turn-based combat, and when it's done right, it's fantastic. The Persona series is a personal favourite of mine, but the turn-based combat in Fairy Tail is just not good, and I mean, it's not what I was expecting it to be honest. For something like Fairy Tail, a high-octane action button masher is a lot more suited than a turn-based combat for a series like this. So, with these problems for me, the game felt pretty dead on arrival, and when I actually played the game, the third problem became apparent. Simply put, the game lacks the polish you would expect from a full-price game. Janky frame rates, crashes, and sometimes ugly looking textures and backgrounds, and it takes away a lot of the novelty of playing with some of my favourite anime characters. And the gameplay, like I said, turn-based wasn't my first choice when it came to an IP like Fairy Tail, but I'm sure it would have been something I could learn to love if it was good and engaging. But that's the thing, it's not. The turn-based combat in Fairy Tail is just boring, it lacks the depth to be even remotely engaging, there's not much stopping you from pressing the highest attack button to beat the big bad, rinse and repeat for 20 hours. That's not great, and even with the skin of my favourite anime, doesn't make the game fun to play, which makes it more disappointing than bad, which is worse because I think of what it could have been. Now, I don't have the same love and affinity for Tokyo Ghoul like I do for Fairy Tail, but if you're of a certain age, you will know the impact that Tokyo Ghoul had on the anime community. It was everywhere, you couldn't escape it, and I definitely got caught up in the hype. That first season was so good, everyone just couldn't wait for a season 2. And then it released and it was a hot pile of garbage, and everyone hated it. And it pretty much single-handedly killed the franchise. It did end up having a reboot of sorts, but it was too little, too late for most. So what did they do years after Tokyo Ghoul was even relevant, let alone popular? Release whatever this was. I mean, relating back to my point that Season 1 was good and Season 2 was bad, why did they decide to start the game in Season 2 of the anime? I do somewhat understand for story purposes, but I'm sure there were solutions around this, by playing a different character maybe. I mean, the game is already short enough as it is, with the game clocking in with a grand total runtime of 3 hours, which is shocking for a game which has full price on release and has little to no replayability. I mean, this is a common complaint amongst most anime games, but of all the ones I played, this is truly one of the most soulless. Other than the fact that the game is extremely dull and lifeless in terms of its presentation, it's just clear it was rushed out the door as quickly as possible, and the so-called cutscenes in the game were nothing but still images ripped from the anime with text underneath. It's just, why even bother? It feels like an insult to the fans of the franchise. Imagine waiting for years for a game of your favourite anime, and it turns out like this. I mean, there's one thing I can credit the game for, is for taking a risk. The gameplay, although nothing that will set the world alight, is at least a little different from a large majority of anime games, which tend to be copy-paste arena fighters, that are fine the first few times you play them with your favourite characters and beat the shit out of each other, but by the time you've played 5 or 6 of these, it gets old. But with Recall, the gameplay is closer to something like you would get in Kingdom Hearts or Devil May Cry. Just a lot worse version. Like, a lot worse version. I mean, like I say, I appreciate them doing something different and taking a risk when they could have just done the same rinse and repeat. But they tried to do something different and it's just not fun. It's janky, it's boring, it's just not good. Just another anime game with wasted potential. Another game from a hugely popular anime from the year 2014 that has since fallen off a cliff in recent years, but in a different way to Tokyo Ghoul. Unlike Tokyo Ghoul, the Seven Deadly Sins anime is still going relatively strong, with us getting a constant influx of new anime series every year. The problem is the general consensus is that the anime is just straight up garbage now. After a very strong first 2 seasons, which catapulted its popularity, its quality just went down and down year on year, and it's almost become a running joke to dunk on the Seven Deadly Sins. But unlike Tokyo Ghoul Recall, this game came out in 2018, arguably at the height of the anime's popularity, so the hallmarks for success were there. Although it's not the worst anime game I've ever played, perhaps the best one in this video, it still stinks of wasted potential for me. Like I previously mentioned, most anime games end up being the copy-paste 3D arena fighters, and this game follows that same formula, which when being honest, it's not like the formula is bad, but by the time Britannia came out in 2018, the formula had been run well and truly dry. Like Sahara Desert dry. It's a shame really, because even though it does bring some unique ideas to the table to try and shake up the formula, it just wasn't enough to make a noticeable difference or change my mind on 3D arena fighters. Now this isn't a huge problem, but it's still a minor issue, and that's the fact that the game doesn't have a proper structure in terms of its narrative. Because in most anime games, you are normally following the story of the anime the game is based on. And it's the same here, but it's almost like an abridged version of itself. You'll get certain story parts in Season 1 all over the place, and the way that they handle Season 2 content was just strange. It was just an excuse for adding Escanor to the game, even though they could have just retold the story from both Season 1 and Season 2, because both had been out for a little while. Now this can be said for all anime games, but for this game in particular, it's one that hits a lot harder. You have some very interesting characters with some unique abilities in the show. No one is really like one another. They're like different classes in an RPG, but in practice, all these characters play the same. Meliodas plays like Barn plays like King, and King plays like Merlin. Yeah, their animations might be different, and yeah, they do different actions, but they all hit the same. It doesn't incentivize you to want to try different characters. Now this might sound a bit nitpicky, but that's the thing with these games, in particular, aren't bad. They just have nothing but missed potential. Now going back to the video's title, it might seem I come off as being a bit harsh, because let's be honest, none of these games in this video are unplayable garbage. In fact, some of these games have some really good ideas and can be enjoyed to a certain extent, but I chose these 3 games for 2 reasons. One, I thought it would be interesting to highlight the anime games that don't get talked about as much as something like the Naruto games and the Dragon Ball games. And the second reason was the fact that these games were all released within the past 6 years, and with the recent disaster release of Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash, shows that even with recent explosion in anime's popularity, these games being pretty mediocre is just kind of unacceptable. Why can't we get an expansive open world Naruto game? Why can't we get an action-based Devil May Cry game in the Fate universe? And please, God, give me a Berserk game with Souls-like combat, please, it would just be magnificent. And in an industry that is this big, we just deserve so much better.